Hi, everyone. I am Sam Osterhout, the executive producer here at Lincoln Square, and I am joined for one of my favorite and very dark conversations with one of my very favorite people, Andra Watkins. Andra, how are you?
Great, Sam. How are you? How's everybody today?
Doing good. The sun is shining. We had a nice spring, sort of dark and rainy day yesterday, which I love those contrasts. The sort of unlocking of spring, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm here for the sun. It's nice. How are you doing? How's your week?
It's good. It's been busy. It's been full of a lot of stuff we're going to talk about. I finished knitting a sweater. Started another one. I have it right here. I can actually show it.
Can we see?
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
So I don't often talk about other things on here. So there you go.
I also learned to knit. I actually learned to knit in college. Some dudes who wanted to be attractive to women learned guitar. For me, it was learning how to knit for some reason. It didn't work out exactly as I thought it was going to, but yeah. But it's actually a hobby that will last a lifetime.
Yeah. No, it's good to have hobbies. I'm very nervous with my hands, and these
Same.
times make you very nervous and hit your ticks. So I've been knitting a lot more.
Yes, and same. And it also, like, when you're sitting on the couch, it keeps you off your phone. Mm-hmm. It keeps you from doing those things that are just total distractions. So I wonder what you all in the audience do to keep yourself from being distracted or to distract yourself from the news, which is also, I'm afraid, we can no longer be distracted because we have some stories this week to get through. So you've been, look, every week you sound an alarm, and I think we're going to run out of them, but we never do. We never run out of alarms to sound. And this is a story that, every woman really needs to hear. And every man who loves a woman or who appreciates being in this world as a fully formed human being also needs to hear. So I'll start with RFK. 3 days ago, RFK Jr. announced a federal plan to push Americans off antidepressants. And this is the thing he's been sort of messaging or hinting at or being sort of coy about for so long. But he's talking about SSRIs taken by 1 in 6 U.S. adults, and by women at more than twice the rate of men. We all know someone who's on an antidepressant, or we ourselves are. This is not breaking news, right? Right. The administration and RFK, they call it deprescribing. Mm-hmm. You have tied it to something, a centuries-old playbook from Christian nationalists or Christians called Coverture. And it's a thing, I'll admit, that I'd never heard of. So I had to look it up.
You don't read Regency smut romance novels, Sam.
Right. Is it a common theme in Regency smut?
Yes.
Oh
yes. I mean, if you watch Bridgerton, that's Regency smut and came from a Regency smut series.
Whoa.
And so, the design of society at that time included coverture. That was part of the society.
Well, so let's talk about that. Let's first define coverture. What is coverture? And then we're going to connect the dots as we go.
Coverture is a concept from English common law, though it existed in other medieval societies in France and elsewhere, that says that a female person has no legal identity. So from birth to death, she must be owned and overseen by a man. And if you read these books, not that I'm recommending that you do, but they are another escape in addition to knitting for me, you will see how this plays out. And they don't talk about poor people because that's not interesting, but they talk about society, which is the money part of society. And so a woman is born into a family unit. She is owned by her father. Her father forces her into the season so that it's the marriage market. You know, we could liken that to the Slave Mart Museum in Charleston, South Carolina, where people were put on display for different purposes, but it's the same display principle where you're supposed to make the best match and attract the best man you can. Then the men negotiate a settlement to transfer the property, the daughter, from the father to the husband, which usually involved transferring her working womb to produce an heir or more, and a cash payment to the husband, who then owned and oversaw her for however long he existed. If something happened to the man, and there's all kinds of conflict that can come up in these stories, Sam, that I read because of these rules. And so if something happens to the husband, say he dies and leaves the wife with 2 small boys, this was a plot of one story, and those boys are not of an age to take over managing and overseeing all the assets of the father, including the wife and mother, then another man, usually a male relative, is appointed to oversee. I keep using that word because it is a word from chattel slavery, the woman. And so he would decide how the property was managed and upkept. He would decide whether she got an allowance and how much it was for her living, and whether she was spending it on the right things. He would decide how the sons were educated. He would decide if some other man came along because her womb still worked and said, well, she can make an heir for me, and this would be a good match for my asset portfolio. He would decide whether or not she could marry him. And then she would transfer to him from her male overseer. So a woman is essentially owned and overseen by men from birth to death. That is coverture. And as I've learned from my smutty romance novels. But this is also, if you've read a book like Jane Eyre,
right,
where there's the crazy wife that's hidden in the attic. It was very common and typical during this era for women who couldn't take it anymore to do things like run off to America,
right,
and disappear and try to start their lives over because they couldn't divorce. They couldn't get out of this system other than running away. And so that was one way that women dealt with it. And another way that women dealt with it was to stand up to it. And they ended up being branded difficult women who needed to be sent away to places like sanitariums and have their mental problems and their difficulties dealt with that way. So they would just be put away. So that's where we circle back to where we started with the concept of a wellness camp that RFK Jr. talked about in his confirmation hearings. Much was made of it last year when he was being confirmed, and talking about sending people who'd been diagnosed with mental illnesses to wellness camps to detox from these drugs and learn different means to cope with their challenges.
And look, I mean, we can tie this to our conversation from last week on HRT and mifepristone, and it's really the same story. They're rebuilding coverture in this way, and so I want you to sort of dig in a little more to the news from Monday and RFK Jr. Again, more than twice as many women take these drugs than men. He's calling it deprescribing. Can you just talk a little bit more about how this actually impacts women and in a more marked way than men?
In my newsletter yesterday, which was Wednesday, we're recording on Thursday. I always like to say that because this runs on Sunday. So if you look for my newsletter from Wednesday, I talk about this, and I actually dug into statistics that are hosted by the National Institutes of Health. Women are more likely to seek therapy. You know, in our society, it is a sign of weakness for a man to say, I have issues and need to go talk to somebody about them, or I can't regulate my responses and I need to figure out why that is. So 20-something% of the women in the study group had sought therapy for various challenges they had and were taking antidepressants or other mood-altering medications, versus 13-point-something% of the men in the study that the NIH did. And that mirrored how much more women are willing to go and seek help than men are. It's not masculine to admit that you have these problems. So part of this disparity comes from how we train men in society to deny these things and not seek help. So it's not necessarily that women are weaker and need these drugs. It's that women are strong enough to say, I need to go talk to somebody and find out what's happening with me. And sometimes that means they are prescribed these drugs. So that's what I found in digging into this data. So RFK Jr. saying, I'm going to come after these drugs. After last week, the EPA saying we're coming after the oral birth control pill, basically, through testing the water. You know, one of the things that a lot of people may not understand about the oral birth control pill and hormone replacement therapy is it's also a means of regulating the hormone fluctuations that naturally come from being a woman. You know, sometimes a woman can have these, I mean, I call myself hormonally challenged my whole life. I've always dealt with some pretty extreme hormone fluctuations at different points, and you can't predict them. I mean, you live in a female household. You understand, you know, you can't predict how these things are going to overtake you. They just happen. That's just part of being female. And so oral contraceptives and hormone replacement therapy are means of regulating that. But sometimes it's not enough, especially during perimenopause, which can start as young as in your mid-30s if you're a woman. So very often women will go and find out that they need extra help to deal with some of those things, and they're prescribed antidepressants or other kinds of mood-altering drugs to help with the fluctuations that happen in the brain from these transitions. And these transitions are uncontrollable. You know, they just happen.
Yeah.
So it's not a coincidence that the regime has now spent the past 2 weeks attacking all the different ways that women have found from 20th and 21st century medicines to cope with what our bodies naturally do to us.
So I want to just, there's a side note, because all of this brings up a lot of feelings for me as well, and a lot of like things. And you know, I've been a science writer for a long time, and I covered a story a few years ago in which, and this is a real detour, but I think it really is, I think it needs to be said. Lab rats have always been male. They select male lab rats, and they have for 120 years, right? And a group of researchers, women among them, were like, what the fuck? Like, why are we only, you know, the outcomes for testing any medication or treatment or therapy on only one gender or sex of animal has rippling implications across the entire healthcare field, right? Because what you're ultimately doing is testing drugs for women only on, you know, male. That means that drugs targeted towards women are not actually targeted towards women. We're just guessing that they work towards women, right? Because most of the testing is done on men. So men and males. So this,
and that's also true in things like studies of heart attacks and what causes heart attacks.
Yes.
You know, those are all male driven studies as well. So this has a ripple effect, not just with medications.
Oh, absolutely.
But with actual health problems.
All research defaults towards male study, right? And so, so this research group, and this is a long story, but I'll make it short, I promise. But it's really fascinating, and I think so appropriate for this discussion. The research group said, "Why we want to find out why only men or males are being tested on, and two, what are the likely outcomes of this?" And so they found in historical research that essentially the idea was that female mice are probably too dysregulated and moody and hormonal and all of the things, right? To be tested on accurately. You need somebody stable, like a man, except there's a catch. And we're laughing because we know the outcome of this. They were like, wait a second, are male mice actually more stable than female mice? That is our cultural perception. It has persisted for hundreds of years, right? So they ran a very rigorous study and found that female mice are predictable to like 99% of the time. Their behavior is steady, and there is some dysregulation periodically due to hormonal fluctuation and all this kind of thing. The male mice were unpredictable by the minute. You could not predict their behavior from 1 minute to the next. They were wildly dysregulated, right? And moody. And so my thinking is like, we're testing for estrogen, we're testing for these hormones that drive women. We're not testing for testosterone, which is the most destructive hormone known to man, as far as I know. Known to man, right? And definitely known to women. So here we are. We're in this state where we're banning, SSRIs and antidepressants. We're banning hormone regulators and birth control for women. And there's a kind of a real problem sticking out like a sore thumb, and it ain't women.
It's not. But RFK Jr. takes testosterone now for his own gender affirmations.
Yes.
Because he doesn't feel like he's man enough, apparently. So he has to take testosterone to feel more like a man. I mean, let's define this what it is. When I take hormone replacement therapy for menopause, I am doing gender affirming care. Right? I'm taking hormones that help me feel more comfortable in my gender as my body changes and releases and doesn't produce any more of those hormones that always historically made me female. That's why in the United States, a dual practice of treating menopause and treating transgender patients has become more normalized, because it's the same treatments. It's the same kind of approach. All of this is gender affirming care. And, I've tried to make the argument for a while now that they're coming for all of that, unless it's testosterone and you're using it as a man to feel more like a man. You're not going to be able to get these treatments. And I don't talk about these things and write about these things to scare people. That's, again, not the point. The point is to start talking with your doctors and your healthcare providers, if you're using these drugs, to talk about what you're going to do if they're suddenly not available or much harder to get. Because if your doctor right now goes, well, you're just being ridiculous and hysterical, and that's not going to happen, then it's time to go look for a new doctor. Because you want a doctor in your corner who's going to say, yeah, I take this seriously, and we're going to fight to get you the treatment you need for as long as we possibly can. That's what you want to hear your doctor saying right now. And that's why I talk about this, so that you can be proactive and go out and try to find those people and assemble that team now.
And, I want to talk a little bit about marriage because it links into all of this stuff. But I want to just, if we're being serious, a doctor who will not treat you is treating or acting on behalf of people like Joel Webbin. Let's play the clip of Joel Webbin at the podium.
That were to occur and the just penalties were to be enforced, you, the false accuser, is now put to death, and that's a public death. It's a public sentence, publicly carried out. Then the citizens of these United States of America, you know what they would do? Hashtag Me Too would end real fast. How do you, false accusing? Playing the victim when you're actually not? Like, you know how to end that real fast? All you have to do is publicly execute a few women who have lied.
So playing the victim.
And let's be clear that he's talking about rape.
Yeah.
You know, or sexual assault, women who accuse men of rape or sexual assault, which he doesn't believe happens ever. So.
Well, under his baseline, it can't. But I think it's so ironic that he's like playing the victim falsely. Dude, that's your whole shtick. You're the victim in everything. It is false. And I want to play this clip about Dale Partridge too. Roll that one.
Because at least one of America's biggest threats is white liberal women, because they are the ones literally opening up the doors of immigration, passing laws that degenerate society, releasing criminals to be repeat offenders, aborting babies by the hundreds of thousands and millions. It's why I really believe that we must, as a nation, repeal the 19th Amendment. Okay, the majority of women are not capable of responsible voting. We can see that just even in this video, right? These are all people that vote. Okay, the majority of women can't do this responsibly. And one last thing I want to say, what men are raising these people, right? Whoever you are, whatever father you are, whatever husband you are an utter failure. Okay, men, you must learn to disciple your wives and raise your daughters to not be feminists, to be sound in judgment, to have wisdom and understanding, so that we don't have a catastrophe on our hands of people thinking this way.
So look, we've talked about the Heritage Foundation's document, Saving America by Saving the Family. They redefine marriage, right? Not as a relationship between two people who love each other, but as, you know, quote, a shared life of duty and virtue. Mm-hmm. Talk us through that.
Well,
can you translate?
That concept comes from coverture.
Exactly.
You know, it is coverture because it is the man's duty to own everything, to manage it, to oversee it, to produce heirs, male heirs especially, so that those assets can be transferred down. It is the woman's duty to marry whoever her daddy picks for her, and whether she loves him or finds him attractive or wants to be around him or not, however he treats her or not, it is her duty to marry that man, to submit to that man, to have as many babies as God gives her with that man, and in all ways defer to that man. That is how coverture is how they're defining marriage. They don't call it that because, you know, that would be a little unsettling to more people. So they found lots of ways to call things something, you know, to define what they want without using words that might offend people or make people go, what? This is not what we want. So, you know, I want to draw a very clear parallel between Saving America by Saving the Family, which is a big chunk of their Project 2026, and how they want to reshape the family. And the basis of that reshaping is coverture. Women are not separate legal identities from their fathers, their husbands, and their other male overseers. They are overseen and owned by men from birth to death.
So, you know, if you got everyone, if you're just tuning in, this is Unholy Ground with Sam and Andra Watkins. I'm Sam and it's Andra. We're talking about this crazy smut novel style thing called coverture, and it is a way to control women. it's not just a way to control, it's a system of controlling women, of owning women. So you've talked about having conversations with women, or being in chats where a woman will say, my state has abortion in its constitution. I'm safe. My state passed a contraception law. I'm totally good. Don't worry about it. And you said that response gave you a mammoth boulder of dread. How come?
Well, I mean, this came from this chat last week where women were saying, I live in a blue state and I can't get other women to pay attention to this. Everybody thinks they're safe because we have protected abortion in our constitution, or we had an amendment that was passed by the voters to protect things, or we've protected contraception. 13 states, I believe, have protected access to contraception in the Constitution, in their state constitution. So, we're going to be fine. This is a red state issue. And if those women voted for that, well, then they deserve to live in the world they voted for. That's what a lot of women have been saying to me, both in the chat last week and elsewhere on my Substack and elsewhere around Substack, that getting women to understand that this is coming for them no matter where they live is really important. And I don't know, you can't force people to pay attention to things and to take it seriously, but we ought to be talking about this and these possibilities and where they want to take this a lot more than we are.
I mean, to that end, I really, we at Lincoln Square do a ton of content. We talk to a lot of people about the legal landscape. We talk about, autocracy and fascism and journalism and media. We talk about all of these things, but I think this is at least one of the most, if not the most important conversation I have every week, because it is so underreported and so essential that everyone knows this. And just not to get too dystopian, but layer in the surveillance piece, because this is where it gets crazy. Doge has built profiles, on millions of Americans that include diagnoses, prescriptions, insurance claims. There's some reporting that suggests this data can be altered. So look, here, the situation is this, SSRIs restricted, HRT, oral contraception restricted, and the federal government already knows who's been prescribed what. Mm-hmm. Take us in a straight line from here to 18 months from now. What's the realistic worst case?
We've talked a lot here about NSPM7. We don't see a lot of reporting about NSPM7 in corporate media. There's just not a lot of discussion about it. I'm seeing more corporate media talking about Christian nationalism, but it's kind of from the perspective of, isn't this quaint and eccentric? These weird little people, it's not reported as a millions and millions and millions of Americans believe these things and adhere to this. And it's a very radicalized group of people that's bigger than you think it is just because you don't know any of them. It's so, because there's a dearth of information about NSPM7 specifically, one of the things that it goes after is hostility toward traditional American views, which is white Christian nationalist views. I always have to remind people, they don't want to put too much of that language in something. They hide it behind phrases like that.
They're not talking about your tradition. They're talking about their tradition.
Right. Of the family and morality. And so, in 18 months, hostility toward traditional American views, white Christian nationalist views on the family and religion and morality could be redefined as, we've said that oral contraceptives are destroying the environment and are bad for women, and we've produced all these studies and we've restricted them, and you're still prescribed taking them according to our records on you. And so this is a violation of NSPM7 and makes us think that maybe you have some sort of anarchist, domestic terror component to you because you're not accepting that we've said that these things are a threat. So, I want people to understand that how NSPM 7 is framed can be applied to anything they decide to attack. So it can be oral contraceptives that you continue to take against their directives. It can be antidepressants that you continue to take. Since I wrote yesterday's piece, it came out a little over 24 hours ago. I have heard from multiple people who have said, I will die if I cannot have these drugs. I literally cannot survive, or my family member cannot survive without them. And so, when people are facing those kinds of things, they're going to try to get the care they need. And when this government has crafted a document that can make you a domestic terrorist, make you an anarchist, make you somebody that they can go after for simply taking a medicine that keeps you alive, that's where we could be in 18 months. If we don't get a handle on this and try to organize in a better fashion to stop them. It's still not too late to stop them, which is another reason we talk about this so much.
Yeah.
It just requires millions more Americans understanding the threat and taking it seriously.
Well, consider everyone out there, consider this your call to arms. And I don't mean that literally. I don't mean guns here. I don't want to get right. We're talking about real power, not violent power, but actual power, the power of collective action. Andra, you keep coming back to this line, no woman is free until all women are free. And I would say none of us are free until all of us are free, right? Because I want to be involved in this,
Well, my husband made that comment on that newsletter. Actually, no men are free until all women are free either.
That is absolutely right. So for the woman watching tonight in California or New York or Massachusetts who genuinely believes she's fine, she's covered, her state's got her back, what's the thing that she needs to do as soon as she ends this, stops watching this and clicks like and sends it out to all of her friends? And then what does she do? And also for men watching who love a woman in a red state, what's their assignment? What do we do?
One of the things that I've started encouraging people to do more is don't just click share and don't just click like and send this to somebody and say, maybe you need to look at this someday. Take this conversation to your next Indivisible meeting and watch it with your Indivisible group. If you have a community group that you've organized to provide collective support, this conversation would be a good conversation to watch with your community group. There are certainly others in our archive. I mean, we could entertain you for hours and educate you for hours from some of the things that we've put together. But these conversations, and then, especially if you go back to some from 6 months ago, and I was saying, these are the things that are going to happen. And oh, gee, wow, now they've happened. So, that makes these conversations more persuasive over time. So there may be people in your local groups, community groups, Indivisible groups who are still skeptical, who are still saying this isn't going to impact me. And as you acclimate them to watching this and talking about it with them, and we see the regime make their next moves, you're going to see some light bulbs go off and people are going to go, oh, I get it now. And so we need to be having those conversations in person wherever we can. Don't just rely on sending an email link and saying you need to watch this. Don't just hit restack on Substack, even though that's important. Actually start having conversations. That applies whether you're in a blue state Indivisible group, a red state Indivisible group, a red state community group that's trying to organize to push back. Doesn't matter. Wherever you are, we have to start taking this, because we don't know how long we're going to be able to do this kind of thing either, or how long it's going to be available. So we have to get comfortable with having these face-to-face conversations and saying, This is why this matters, and this is why you have to pay attention to it. So that's your assignment wherever you live, to go out and do that.
I want to give one other assignment is, I always like to end the show just a little bit happy that we've got this. We can do this, but you have to be awake, and you have to be ready to collaborate, and you have to be ready to take action. We get to design the world we want to live in. They don't want that. They don't want us to. They don't want us to have that right or to have that ability. We get to design our own existence, and that's what we're going to do.
I mean, there are, again, we say this almost every week, there are 8 billion of us on this planet, and about 2,000 of these tech bro, fascist, rich people, and a few, maybe 100,000 of their enablers.
Yeah.
There are so many more of us than there are of them. Even in the United States, the PRI group just put out their most recent Christian nationalism survey, and they only make up about 33% of U.S. population between the highly radicalized and the adjacent ones. There are so many more of us, y'all, than there are of them. So don't let them make you discouraged.
Well, and look, if it's 33% of highly radicalized and adjacent, right? The adjacent are the ones who will not stand up to pressure, right? They're the ones who are like, oh, you can call them out, and you ought to say, you can't, like, how are you doing this? The highly radicalized, forget it, but that's a tiny percentage.
Yeah. And so these conversations, this work is valuable. Keep defining the kind of country you want. Keep informing your connections about what could be coming, and start organizing to protect each other, to help each other, to aid each other in case they continue to be successful. That's, and in that, you're designing the country you want. That is a parallel system.
Yep. That's it.
So there's hope in that.
And one last call, subscribe to For Such a Time as This. It is such an incredible Substack newsletter, and it is this conversation, but with receipts, with details, with links, with all the things you need, all of those resources. And of course, subscribe to Lincoln Square. And Andra, I appreciate you, and I hope you have a good weekend, and I will see you next week.
Bye, everybody.